And we are recording with Dr. Ted Postol on Monday, December 16th, 2024 at 1:04 p.m. Eastern Time. He's been on here several times before, but I guess the reason I reached out to you was concerning I don't even know how to say it, the Oreshnik missile that looked like ICBM duds like MIRVs, and then they started saying it's IRBMs, and whatever it is, it's terrifying, and the fact that it was used in combat is a undeniable escalation. And I originally reached out to have you on, and this is why you're so credible, is you said you don't want to come on, just start shooting from the hip. You want to research it more and understand it more, which is why you're a wonderful source to have on here. So that's what we're getting into today. And but Dr. Postal, for everyone that doesn't know you, could you introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll just jump on into it.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what were you saying? I
I was gonna say
missed.
for anyone that doesn't know you, you're an MIT professor. Could you just
Yeah.
introduce yourself, and then we'll go on.
Yeah, right. Okay. So you want me to introduce myself? Is that?
Yeah, or not. I don't care.
Oh,
We can just
no,
jump
whatever
into
you
it. Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
What are you up to? What do you
Yeah,
want?
yeah, no. So for everybody listening, yeah. So you've been on here several times before. We've talked about ICBMs, MIRVs, kind of all things thermonuclear war, and the nitty gritty of these kind of doomsday weapons. And you've been looking into this specifically to get a clearer, I don't know, picture of what this was. So what what all do you it was it just an ICBM? Was it an IRBM? Is it anything new? Is it anything truly special because or was it just an ICBM, which isn't not special. It would be incredible if it was used in combat. But what do you think this is?
Well, what is interesting and unique about this Oreshnik missile is that it has a very large number of submunitions. By submunitions, I mean explosive devices. They have the effect of explosives. I'll explain what I mean by that shortly. They're not simple explosives, and they are delivered by a ballistic missile. And these questions about ICBM versus IRBM and so forth are really a little deceptive. The terminology is not really indicating the details, the special aspects of this missile. Basically, it's a ballistic missile. And by ballistic missile, I mean it flies a ballistic trajectory. That is to say, you throw the missile, has a powered flight phase. After the powered flight phase shuts down, it coasts through the near vacuum of space or high altitudes under the influence of gravity and momentum. So this is not a missile that is what might be called a boost glide missile. A boost glide missile is typically would be a missile that uh, launches a payload of some type uh, onto a trajectory that tends toward being parallel to the Earth's surface. And then as the payload uh, travels along roughly parallel to the Earth's surface, it loses altitude. And as it loses altitude, it has an aerodynamic shape so it can skip off the upper atmosphere and basically glide at very high speeds. Uh, Typically, the terminology is hypersonic speeds, but basically, all hypersonic means is that it's a speed in excess of Mach 5, which is not, which is a very high speed, but for a ballistic missile, it's not especially unusual in speed. So, for example, in the case of the Oreshnik missile, the payload re-enters the atmosphere at about Mach 10. So it's about twice the speed of over the threshold of being hypersonic. Now, just to give you a sense, we know a little bit about this missile because we have seen debris from it. So what I'll do is first show you a little bit of pictures of the debris. And I don't know if you can you see
Mhm.
my cursor? Probably
Yeah.
not. Oh,
Yeah,
you
yeah, I
can
can
see
see
the
it.
cursor. Great.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So the cursor is circling around what is probably the front end of a module, one of six modules. I'll show you the diagram shortly, how it's arranged on top of the ballistic missile. And this is the front end of the module, which looks sort of like a hemispherical uh, uh, protective surface. And then in the back here, which is very hard to see, there's a propulsion system. And if we just go on a little further, we can see this front end from a different perspective. You can see it's a nose of a submunition carrying canister. By submunition carrying, I mean this canister carries munitions that will re-enter the atmosphere at extremely high speeds, close to Mach 10, and um, and then hit the ground at very high speeds. And because they hit the ground at such a high speed, their kinetic energy gets converted into the equivalent of explosive effects. And I'll explain how that happens.
Like a rail
It's
gun.
really, it's really because of the very high speeds. And next, next to this on the lower left, you see a propulsion section for this canister. The um, the propulsion section consists of a high pressure gas system. So this spherical container is filled with a high pressure gas. It's the way the gas maintains its pressure is there's some kind of material that's combusting. It's a hot gas. It's not as hot as the exhaust of a rocket motor, but it's very hot. It achieves a very high pressure, and and then there are little lines coming out from this central uh, container that carries the high pressure gas, and they feed nozzles. Here you can see one of the nozzles that have, in fact, I think it's the only nozzle in this picture that has not broken off when this piece of debris hit the ground. Now, the piece of debris probably hit the ground at maybe Mach zero point 0.7 or Mach zero point 0.8 or even less. Probably, I'm sorry, probably about Mach zero point 0.2 or zero point 0.3. Now, the reason it hit the ground so slowly is this canister broke open at higher altitudes and dispersed the six submunitions. We know there's six, for reasons I'll show you shortly. And there were six canisters, each of which carried six submunitions. So there were 36 submunitions delivered. Now, the components of the canister do not weigh a lot. So as they go into the denser atmosphere, the aerodynamic drag slows them up quite a bit. So when they hit the ground, they're going at maybe 150 miles per hour, 200 miles per hour. And just as you see a car that hits a wall at that high speed, it breaks up into many pieces, but it's not completely shattered, or nor does it vaporize because the speed is not nearly high enough to cause that effect. So we have these pieces of debris. Here's a better view of the container. In this particular image, we see on the lower left one almost completely intact nozzle, and there's a mechanism, a hydraulic mechanism of some kind that allows the nozzle to be moved up and down and back and forth. And so there are six of these nozzles coming out of the rear end. The pressure, the gases coming out of the nozzle are not enormously high speed. So they generate a thrust, but not an enormously high thrust. But that thrust is good enough to change the orientation of the capsule and maybe give it a little speed if that's a desired objective, and move it into a position along the axis of arrival of the general payload. So if we want to see what this upper stage looks like, the diagram below here is a diagram published of a concept somewhat like this. It's a completely different system, really, but it was published in the Russian literature by the design bureau chief, where this missile was designed. The probable configuration, almost certainly, is of a first stage. In the upper section here, you see a first stage. I've cut it short, but it's probably roughly the length of these two stages below. And there are 6 canisters. Notice the canisters have a hemispherical shape, and I've arbitrarily chosen some shapes to give you a sense of the size of the submunitions. So the submunitions probably do not look like cones. They're probably a little extended with flared ends because of aerodynamic stability. If they were simply cones, they would tumble end over end. So they don't have the right balance for aerodynamically stable reentry in this for this diagram. But that's because I just
Yeah.
wanted to establish a scale of size. I didn't want to worry about a shape where we have no knowledge of what it could look like. So these are roughly the size of a munition. If it were made of iron or steel, doesn't have to be. We would guess it's going to have a weight of about 150 or 200 pounds each, based on the ability of the missile to carry a certain payload, which we have estimated from an assumption. The assumption is probably pretty good, but it's a very general assumption. The assumption is that we are using the first stage of a 3-stage ICBM. So we have an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, which has 3 stages, and we're going to use only the first stage to manufacture a missile that has a certain um, uh, uh, lift and velocity potential. Now we know that the missile flew about 800 kilometers from Kapustin Yar, 800 to 1,000 kilometers from a launch site on the right side of this diagram, from Kapustin Yar to Dnipro, the city that was the target of the attack. And we also know from an announcement made by the Americans and then repeated by the Ukrainians that this trajectory took 15 minutes to travel the 800 kilometers. Now, if this were a boost glide vehicle, it would have taken 5 minutes. So this is a critical piece of information. And this critical piece of information tells us what the trajectory of this missile was, and it tells us it was a ballistic missile. In other words, if you look on the left here, if we had a first stage of an ICBM rocket motor, it might burn. Typically, they burn 60 seconds. It might be burned 65 seconds, might burn 70 seconds, but we don't need to worry about that. So for the postulated ICBM first stage, which would be from a standard Russian ICBM, exactly the model people talk about an RS-26, an RS-25, an RS-27. It really doesn't matter within the uncertainties of our trajectory estimate. So, but we can assume that in order to place the trajectory, in order to place the payload onto this trajectory I'm showing you here on the right, the first stage would have flown a very steep vertical trajectory with a burnout angle of maybe close to 70 degrees relative to normal. So it's quite high burnout angle. And if this were a boost glide trajectory, what the rocket would have done is it would have started turning over to propel its payload onto a flatter type of trajectory, and the payload would then be maneuvering in the atmosphere as it dropped into the atmosphere and skipped off it. That's clearly what was not, that was clearly not the trajectory that was used for this missile, because this trajectory takes 15 minutes. An alternative trajectory of the type I just described would take 5 minutes. So we know that this is a ballistic missile. Now, on this right uh, diagram here, in the lower left corner, where we see 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers on the horizontal and vertical axes, we have roughly we have the flight trajectory, the powered flight trajectory of the rocket first stage, and then depending on whether it's going 800 kilometers or 1,000 kilometers, we have it launching its payload toward Dnipro. Now, uh, what the stage would have done, given its design, given the postulated design, so we don't know exactly, but it's a very good guess that it would do this based on the technologies that are commonly used. And my guess is that this missile was really adapted from technologies that were already in hand and rapidly adapted by these very capable missile designers and engineers in the Russian system. And basically, what the first stage would have been done is because it launches the payload in a forward direction, you want it to be oriented in the forward direction when it deploys the submunitions. So what you would do is you'd put rocket motors,
Mm-hmm.
very small rocket motors, on the front and back, or even the front or back, and you would slowly rotate this vehicle so that it's pointing downward along the trajectory direction at the point where the payload's going to be released. And we don't know exactly when this was done, so this is a notional guess. It could be done later, it could be done earlier. Notice that we're talking, just to give you a sense, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in this case, 6.5 minutes coasting. So there's plenty of time to very slowly turn this thing, stabilize it, and have it properly oriented for dispensing the submunitions. Notice also that by the time the subunit, assuming they're just basically dispensed at apogee or a little bit lower, they have such a high speed that by the time they're 14 minutes into the flight trajectory, so they're a minute before they hit the ground, they're traveling at Mach 11 in this 200-kilometer altitude here. So they're traveling pretty fast. Now, as they descend to lower altitudes, they encounter the atmosphere. Let me just show you that. In this uh, graph on the left, the vertical axis is altitude, and the horizontal axis is velocity. So if you look at so these are 1 second intervals. This is the Oreshnik velocity, the, the basically the speed of the rocket motor and or the submunitions. And you see at 250 kilometers, they're traveling at around Mach 9, 3,100 meters per second. And as they keep descending from 250 kilometers altitude, about 50 kilometers altitude, they're getting faster, they're moving faster till they're traveling at a speed near Mach 11. It's just gravity acting on these vehicles when they're without the atmosphere. Then, when they start encountering a denser and denser atmosphere, you can see they're slowing up. And I've made a design assumption that they have a certain what's called ballistic coefficient, which basically means the aerodynamic drag relative to their weight. If they have a very small aerodynamic drag relative to the weight, they don't slow up very fast. And in this particular case, based on these assumptions, they hit the ground at a Mach 10, at roughly Mach 10. So that's what I'm guessing. And I think that's probably a very reasonable first order guess. Now we were able to see these things coming in. In this video, these are video frames taken from the video. These first two frames on the upper left of this um, uh, group of video frames is from the first cluster. And if you're very careful and have a little imagination, you can imagine that you have about six
Hmm.
submunitions in this cluster. And then we have a second cluster, which is also the frames 3 and 4. And you can see these are more easily seen. You have, again, uh, six in this cluster. And then we have a fourth cluster in the next three frames, and we can count again roughly six. And then a fifth cluster, and then a sixth cluster. And so you can see that the clusters are not all the same. Some of them are very tight, and some of them are spread out. And that could be controlled as the as the submunitions are deployed from the canister. This is a speculation. We don't know. It's not hard to do. You could just have a little explosive
Hmm.
charge on each of the submunitions, and you have a small mechanism that just changes very slightly its angle relative to the axis of symmetry of the submunition. You detonate the explosive, and then the submunition comes off with a slight lateral speed. And so you can change the the density of the cluster. This could be relevant. I don't know it's relevant. It could be relevant because if you were attacking a certain type of target, let's say you were attacking uh, an anti-aircraft site, you might want things clustered very close because this could be hundreds of meters,
Hmm.
as I'll show you, rather than something that could be close to a kilometer, as we have here. We know this because I can show you from the next diagrams. These are diagrams taken from a different angle. These are video frames taken from a different angle. The camera is a much less advanced camera. It has what we would say a low dynamic range. By low dynamic range, I mean if it has difficulty discriminating between very bright and bright areas. In the other camera, we have a much better
Hmm.
dynamic range, so it can tell the difference between bright and dark areas. Whereas in this other camera here, we're unable to do that. But we can still make a rough guess of where the munitions would be. They're probably a little forward of these locations. But what I've basically done is once I established a relative relationship of these objects to each other, I just assume, which is good to a first approximation, that the geometry of their arrangement relative to each other does not change much. And so we can track them to the ground and get a sense of their direction. And so if we look at this particular situation, we um, uh, we we can see in this case a significant ground explosion in one of the video frames. We don't see very significant effects of explosions from the other impacts. And that is understandable because the impacts maybe have the equivalent of 100 to 250 pounds of explosive effect. So they're not giant explosive effects. It's a very dramatic situation. Let's be clear. When these objects come in, obviously they're very bright in the sky. They're trails. They're lighting up the scene below. So it's got to be terrifying. and they're traveling at hypersonic speeds, so they're making a tremendous supersonic boom in the sky, from a supersonic motion. So there's sound, there's bright light, and there are explosions. So it's not something that if you were on the ground you would take lightly. This is a particularly a useful image because what I've done with this image is I've played with the brightness and contrast of this image in order to be able to see some objects in the background. There are three chimneys here and then a fourth one to the right. And this turns out to be useful because we have an estimate from my very talented colleague, Chris Kabusk, who helped me greatly with this analysis. And what Chris did is he went into the data and he found these three chimneys and the fourth chimney and the location of the camera.
Jeez.
So we know what the location of the camera is. So we know the geometry in which we're seeing these objects come in. This area here that's got a faint red faint red barrier is the Yuzhny a machine building plant. This is a giant plant. It's nearly a kilometer in length. So with these chimneys, we can see that from our look, there may be 200 to 300 meters apart from this particular perspective, which means the munitions were spread over maybe 600 to 800 or even 900 meters. So that's a big area. So now there were other munitions that came in very closely packed together within a few hundred, within 100 or 200 meters of each other. I can't tell whether that's the geometry of the way they were dispersed or if it just because they will tend to be dispersed in a line, but because of the way deployment mechanisms work. But they could simply be dispersed into a very tight cluster. And if that's the case, this means that they can control that the Russians, when they use such a weapon in the future, they can control the tightness of the cluster. It looks like the accuracy of the overall cluster, so that's to say the center of the cluster, it looks like it's probably placed with a precision of maybe 150 to 200 meters, which is probably good enough to try to go after, let's say, an air defense system. If you use multiple clusters to go after the system. So it could be used for targets of smaller area. We just don't know that. We just, that's something to be found out in some possible future situation. Here, just for your audience, this is around 250 to 300 meters, as seen here are the chimneys and the tower or the other chimney. So this distance, depending on the perspective, is somewhere around 250, 300 meters. So we have a very rough estimate of the precision of the munitions. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about the capabilities of these munitions. In particular, there were claims about the munitions be able to penetrate deep into the ground. And there are munitions that can penetrate deep into the ground, but they must hit the ground at much lower speeds. In other words, if I have, let me just depict here a munition that is filled with explosives. So it's getting its explosive power not from its kinetic impact. It's getting its explosive power from explosive materials that are going to detonate once it penetrates deep into the ground. A munition like this might hit the ground at Mach 3 or Mach 4. So, at Mach 3 or Mach 4, if you think of of me having a rod, and I push the rod fast enough that the whole rod moves together because the speed of sound in the rod allows the force from the front of it to reach the end and move the whole rod uh, together. But imagine instead that I hit the front of the rod so fast that it compresses up because the speed of sound is the limit at which the force can be transmitted in the normal material. So if I hit at 2 or 3 times the speed of sound, so the compression wave moves, but the whole region in front gets compressed by a significant amount. And what happens in that case is the region gets heated. It's just like, you have your bicycle pump and you're pumping up your bicycle tire
Hmm.
and it's getting hot. And but this happens very violently at Mach 10. So so what happens at Mach 10 is basically uh, the material crushes up and liquefies, and it liquefies to a very high temperature and basically becomes a gas, a vapor. It's a metal, though. Keep in mind, so it's maybe 3, 4,000 degrees Celsius, maybe even a little hotter. Well, if you have a vapor of iron or steel or something else, titanium, um, this is going to expand violently outward now under its own kinetic energy. Its thermal energy is pushing everything out. The kinetic energy of forward motion has been converted to heat, and the heat now is just like the heat that's generated from an explosion. And because you have all this hot material under a very high internal pressure and very high temperature, it violently moves outward, really essentially like the violent movement of an explosive. So if you filled this device with explosives, it would be somewhat lighter in weight because the density of the metal is higher than that of the explosives. You can get higher densities of metal. So you wouldn't necessarily get a lot more explosive power. So there are metal explosives you can use, but the most you can get is maybe a factor of 2 increase in the explosive energy relative to the weight. So you're getting the equivalent explosive energy of the weight of the munition. That's roughly what you're getting. So 200 to 400 pounds of explosion. And of course, the explosive wave generates a shock. The shock blows things out of a crater and generates a shock wave. Now, the shock wave generated by an explosion that generates a significant crater, the shock wave in the air tends to be somewhat diminished from the shock wave if you just put the explosive on the ground and detonated it, because a significant amount of the energy goes into digging a crater. Of course, that can be useful. The crater can do a lot of damage when you construct the crater, but it's a trade-off. So you expect the shock wave to be somewhat diminished in range, not necessarily insignificant, but somewhat diminished. The ratio of shock that goes into the air versus the ground is different. And it's in the case of a kinetic object like this, it's larger in the ground than it is in the air, the ratio. So this is just a arithmetic. I can send anyone who wants the slides, just let me know and I'll send it to you. And this shows you that the weight of the munition is equivalent to its explosive. The kinetic energy of the munition is equivalent to its weight in TNT. Maybe it's 1.5 times the weight if it's going at, let's say, Mach 11. But 1 to 1.5 times its weight in TNT. So we can estimate the size of the crater because we know what explosive craters produce. And if we have 100 kilogram explosives, 200 pounds of explosive crater, and the depth of burst is kind of optimal, not buried in the ground, but sort of gives you a significant surface crater. we know that the radius is going to be 1 to 2 meters, and means the diameter is going to be 2 to 4 meters. So that's what you're going to see. Where there's a crater, you're going to see a crater of 5 to 10 feet across, 12 feet across. So now, if we look for damage, we had a hard time finding damage. We just here is damage to a building. Um, it was unlikely caused by a submunition. The
Yeah.
reason uh, Chris and I have concluded this is because it looks like something big went through the roof, probably at not too high a speed. So it could have been a falling piece of the rocket that would have hit the roof at 150, 200 miles per hour. So it doesn't have to be too heavy to cause this kind of damage to a tin roof that only has modestly strong timber supporting it. So we don't know, but my guess is this building was damaged by a falling piece of the rocket, whatever it was. And the reason we think it's a falling piece is if it were submunition, first of all, it would be more localized at the roof, and it would have created a blast wave when
Yeah.
it produced the crater that would have probably blown these walls out because the walls are not reinforced. They're just bricks put on top of each other, and they're only going to stand up to 5 or 10 pounds per square inch of pressure. And that would probably be enough for an interior blast of 100 or 200 psi, 100 or 200 pounds TNT to blow those walls down. We do see evidence of shock wave because the windows are blown out, and that's means that the shock wave from whatever happened internally was 2 or 3 or 4 pounds per square inch, but not 10. So that's one example. We have another example of a structure. Oh, this is the same structure. This is the internal damage to the structure. So you see, there was general damage inside the structure, but internal walls were not blown out, for example, which a higher blast over pressure would have easily done. So, so this structure was significantly damaged. I mean, you wouldn't want to be in it when it gets hit, but it was not hit. For example, if a 500-pound bomb had hit this structure, it would have been leveled. It just would have been debris sitting there, a pile of debris. So it wasn't the equivalent of a 500-pound bomb. Maybe the equivalent of a 100-pound bomb that produced a crater in the floor or something, or maybe 200 pounds, but certainly not a 500-pound bomb. So here is a building that may have been hit by a submunition. We say may because we just don't know. Um, it looks like something hit on top here, and the floors in these poured concrete structures can be pretty thick. So the floor could have been thick enough for the submunition, let's say it's a 100-pound submunition, to hit the floor, vaporize, and cause an explosion the equivalent of 100 or 200 pounds per square inch of explosive. Now, there was a brick wall up here, you can see, and that could have generated an overpressure blast of 10 or more pounds per square inch easily. And you could see that these walls were blown out. So that's an example of damage that might have occurred from a submunition. We really don't know. Here is a structure that is somewhat interesting because it's a good guess. A guess is that a submunition landed behind it, and the submunition exploded. It exploded. I mean, the very hot metallic vapors from the expanding molten uh, vapors of the superheated vapors of the molten metal set fire to things around them. And so there's a fire there that also propagated to the building. Notice that the building windows are not broken.
Yeah.
But if we look at the back, we have other pictures of this. If we look at the back of the house here, we see that so this is the front and this is the back. The submunition probably may have fallen here somewhere to the left in the lower photo. Might have caused general damage. Was severe enough blast that at the further range broke the windows. But again, it was not dramatic damage. Again, like 100, 200 pounds of munitions going off in the backyard and partly buried, thereby taking some of the blast uh, out of the out of the atmosphere, out of the air, and putting it into cratering. Um, this is an area that looks like it may or may not have been hit by submunitions. If this area was hit by submunitions, they could have set fire to shrubs because there would have been hot metallic vapor producing localized craters. But again, you don't see catastrophic damage to the buildings that are behind them. And uh, we have that we Chris was able to find this area where the impact occurred. Notice it's a small distance from the Kuzhny uh, machine manufacturing plant. We're looking from the other direction from the photograph I showed you earlier, and uh, and you it's possible that there was a submunition that fell outside the boundaries of the plant, but we've been unable to find any direct evidence of significant damage in the plant. Having said that, though, finding evidence of significant damage in a plant that's got this complexity is very difficult and is really, I don't think anyone who claims they have found damage is is playing fair with all the cards that they're laying on the table. The resolution of these satellite photographs that you can get commercially is poor. And even when you have very high resolution satellite photographs of the kind that the military can have, U.S. military, you need a sequence of photographs. You need people, lots of people to pore over the photographs, and ground damage can be a very difficult thing to assess. So the fact that we don't see it doesn't mean it wasn't there and it wasn't significant. It's just hard to know. Just here's another example of the ground damage. Here's a photograph. We just don't know what occurred. I mean, you have someone sweeping up something, who knows? Doesn't look like a crater that would have been caused by submunition. If there was a crater caused in the background, it certainly was not severe enough to cause the damage to this building. More likely, this cratered area below was from maybe a cruise missile that hit with 1,000-pound warhead. If that's what it is, we don't know. And 1,000-pound warhead could have done this general damage to the building, given where it fell. But it certainly was not a kinetic energy impact. So that's basically what we know. I mean, this is the situation. So the Oreshnik is a new kind of weapon system. It could be used to do significant damage in some specialized situations. I do not think people don't like me saying this, and I'm not trying to attack anybody politically. I'm just trying to state the technical facts. This does not have the effects of a nuclear weapon. Not close. Uh, if the entire payload of the munitions were in the form of bombs, which it could have been, you could have put, let's say, you could have put easily five, six, or eight, 500 explosive bombs, slowed them up, and hit the ground. You would have done more damage, possibly, but it wouldn't have been the effects of a nuclear explosion. A nuclear explosion would level areas on the order of sizes of tens to hundreds of square kilometers, depending on the yields of the weapon. So when claims are made that this is like a nuclear weapon, I don't think that's appropriate. It's like a powerful, uh, high explosive weapon, and anybody who I would certainly order you, or suggest to you, take shelter if this kind of thing is coming in and you're under attack. So I'm not suggesting it's nothing,
Sure.
but it's not on a new scale of damage inflicting capability.
Yeah. If anything, it seems like the real value of it is the speed of delivery and thus the difficulty to intercept. So I mean
Well, it's you can't intercept it for
that
sure.
precisely. It's
Um, uh, Again, given the war in Ukraine's current situation, there's not much that can be done about intercepting cruise missiles or even drones. I mean, the just yesterday, the Russians destroyed a whole Patriot brigade, the radar and four launchers, and they just destroyed the whole damn thing. That's $1 billion worth of military equipment.
yeah,
So, the Russians have very skillfully devised tactics that have essentially eliminated the air defense system of Ukraine, and they can go about their business without worrying about air defenses to a very good first approximation. It's possible in a very unfavorable situation they could lose an aircraft or cruise missile to air defenses, but the odds are very low. I think these air defenses are essentially gone for all practical purposes, and the effects of this are clear in terms of the combat situation on the ground for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are in deep, deep, deep trouble. The war is over for them. And the longer this war continues, the more innocent people are dying who are Ukrainian and Russian for an end that is already determined.
yeah,
So the best thing to do is end this thing with some kind of armistice and agreement
yeah,
as quickly as possible so more people are not killed for no end, for no purpose.
yeah,
So,
yeah, and not to just speculate wildly, but yeah, I mean, if
yeah.
you can't intercept drones or cruise missiles, it's like, well, why use the Oreshnik? It seems more, in my completely unexperienced opinion, it seems more like that it was more to show NATO or the US, here is something, and it's not doomsday like nuke. You could hit a high value target, you could hit a diplomat, you could hit an aircraft carrier, you could hit whatever.
Yeah.
That's yeah, it doesn't
Well,
seem to have been aimed at Ukrainians per se. If they can't
well,
intercept a
well,
cruise
there have been claims that this poses a serious threat to aircraft carriers, but I think when you do the arithmetic, I've done this many times because aircraft carriers are subjects of great interest these days. Using a ballistic missile without homing guidance against an aircraft carrier is a very difficult kind of uh, it's very unlikely to be successful. An aircraft carrier can move at 25 or 30 knots. That's not fast, but you really have to hit the carrier. You have to hit it. You have to put the munition through the planform of the carrier itself. And at 30 knots, the carrier can move, 10 or 20 or 30 meters per second. And, it takes you minutes to get to the target. The trajectory can be predicted by remote sensing systems, radars even, and the character can take evasive maneuvers. I mean, one way to think of it is think of the evasive maneuver. If you've seen videos, which are good videos of the battle for Midway, where bombers were dropping bombs from high altitude on carriers, and you can see them making sharp turns to avoid the bombs. They were often missed. They could often evade the bombs because of the time it took the bombs to be released versus where the carrier was when they finally hit the surface. Now, of course, the distances are much smaller and the speeds are much slower, but this is the kind of situation that you would have if you're using a ballistic missile against the carrier. You cannot predict exactly where it will be, and modern radars can see the incoming warheads at far enough range that the carrier would have minutes of warning, minutes, to know where the impact points were. And that's plenty of time to move the carrier out of range. So I think that this idea that you're going to sink carriers with this kind of weapon is just it's just not correct. You just as long as the carriers have good radar support, which they will have, um, it will not be the carriers will be able to take evasive maneuvers. Now, can you sink carriers? Absolutely. I think if we, the Americans, are foolish enough to get into a war with China over Taiwan, we will, and I'm not saying this with any happiness, we will lose multiple carriers to the Chinese. We better know this because before we get into a war, we better understand we are not dealing with a third-rate military power when we're dealing with China now. They are now a first-rate military power, and they have submarines, and those submarines are armed with with fast cruise missiles. Some of them may be hypersonic, but others are supersonic. And you can shoot down some of these missiles with fleet defense. But if you have a boatload of them coming in, you're going to be limited at what you can do. These submarines are very quiet. They're air independent propulsion type submarines. They can sneak up quite close to the carrier. They don't even have to sneak up to the carrier. They just have to sit there and wait for the carrier to move to them at some point because the carrier will be patrolling around the ocean area where combat is occurring, and they will sink carriers. I mean, war games show that this happens. And so the main threat to carriers is not from ballistic missiles. It's really from supersonic cruise missiles launched by submarines, which are very quiet and numerous. The Chinese have been building these things at a high rate, and it will cost us many capital ships if we go into a war in the Formosa Straits. It will just not be a pretty thing. And I think American political leadership needs to start thinking about this. The reason I'm saying this is because I want to avoid the loss of a lot of American capital capability and, more importantly, the soldiers who are on those ships, the sailors. This is a foolish idea that American political leadership needs to understand is a foolish idea. This idea that we are steaming off the coast of China at the end of World War II, where the country is nothing but a bunch of mud huts, is over. That's not the case anymore. This is a modern, capable country that can fight us at a near technology as a near technology equal at their own borders, where the logistics problems that they would normally face don't exist, and we're the ones with the logistics problem.
Hmm.
So we better stop this stupid talk, insanely dangerous talk about getting into a war with China over Taiwan. It's just reckless.
Agreed. Yeah, it's you can't yeah, you can't go in there and pretend like you're going against like Afghanistan or something. It's just not what it is. It's just
Yes.
it doesn't mean you can't still, be diplomatic or even, even shift it to different, economic or tariffs. But I mean, yeah, you got to know where it is, and it's just doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong. It's just where we are. It's not. It's not 1945. We're not.
Well, China is a giant economic competitor now. I do not believe that they have any, well, I could be wrong, but I don't believe they have any really military designs on the United States.
Yeah.
I think they are very rational in their thinking about Taiwan. I mean, I've been to China many times. They believe Taiwan is part of China. They have reason to believe it. There's historical reason for their belief. It's also reasonable that the Taiwanese population does not want to live in a system that's repressive. I also accept that the Taiwanese want to have a political system, want to live under a political system that's much freer for them. The the Chinese understand that Taiwan is a great financial partner, economic partner with them. They are their biggest economic partner. The idea that they would destroy the economic future of Taiwan by going in invading it is, I think, it's a reflection of the idiocy of people who think that that's what they who would do that themselves. The Chinese are too smart to do that. They will continue to try to pressure Taiwan, and and the Taiwanese need to stand strong. But I do not think the Chinese will ruin the goose that's laying golden eggs for them,
Yeah.
uh, because they believe, and I think they're right, that time is on their side. Sooner or later, both systems will transition politically into some form of compromise. And that'll happen. Maybe it'll be 50 years from now, maybe it'll be 30 years from now, maybe it'll be 100 years. They're patient and they're not going to do something stupid. So let's stop antagonizing them and let these two countries work their problems out together.
Agreed. Just they're over there. Let them at it. Just go for
Yeah,
it. Leave me alone. I don't care. Yeah, no,
yeah.
I'm with you. I'm with you. You said it much more
Well,
eloquently than me, but yeah, no, same idea. Um, well, Dr. Postal, that was awesome, man. Thank you. I expected nothing less, and I got what I wanted. I appreciate it.
well, great.
I appreciate it. I wanted a deep dive into it, and I'm extremely grateful for your time and thank you for that. If people do want this, do you want me to put your email in the
Yeah,
description?
just put it's Postol. The only mistake you can make is misspell my name. It's OL at MIT.edu, which is easy enough to remember.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So if
just
people,
send me a note. Try to be very clear. Please send me slides.
yeah,
Because I get a lot of people, because other shows are asking me for slides and they don't always ask me for the same slides. So don't, let me know what you want.
say
Okay.
Russian slides, big
Yeah, well,
lights. Say that.
Oreshnik slides. Say Oreshnik slides. Okay.
Oreshnik. Yeah, no Taiwan war slides. Yeah, do
Yeah,
that one.
right, right.
You'll get it.
That's another story, which I haven't yet done any work on.
Well, Dr. Postal, man, that was awesome, dude. I appreciate it. I always enjoy you coming on here, man. It's always really is a pleasure to talk to you, and I genuinely appreciate your time.
Well, thanks a lot, Tom. Nice to be here.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And guys, if you want it, email them postal postol at mit.edu. I will text you this episode. And if we don't talk soon, you have a very Merry Christmas, sir.
You too. You too.
Thank you
Bye
so
bye.
much. Guys,
Take
thank you
care.
so much for watching. Take